Just like any time FromSoft releases something, there becomes the outcry issue of, is something too difficult, and the need for difficulty sliders in games to make a return, because having a singular difficulty can prove too challenging and other people deserve to be able to beat games regardless of difficulty sliders or base game or any feelings like that. And every time I just sit back and look and just think, we're really having this discussion again. And it happens so often now that I feel like I actually should talk about it from the prospect point of somebody who's played every Dark Souls game and pretty much Demon Souls, Bloodborne, all the FromSoft ones that are considered Souls-likes and hard difficulty games, and explain that, well, in short, yes, the Dark Souls games are way too difficult, but in the long answer, they're not that difficult. It's a lot of issues within yourself and the way that you think. And I'm basically just going to go over everything that makes the older Souls iterations way more difficult than Elden Ring, and why even the Elden Ring DLC isn't the hardest DLC that FromSoft has even released, and how a lot of this is what more or less the Souls community is considered a skill issue and to get good. And hopefully by the end of it, you guys understand, and maybe if you're one of those people that has had difficulty with the DLC, you'll be able to understand why you might be having it, and maybe be able to reflect upon yourself and see, what am I doing wrong personally, and how you could change it so you can actually beat the DLC without me explicitly helping you with the DLC. So let's get started. We're going to talk about the old Dark Souls games. We're going to start with Dark Souls 1, is one of the timeless classics that a lot of FromSoft users love. Some hate, but realistically, it's mostly comes down to motor controls in the game of only being 4 directions and not omnidirectional like Dark Souls 2 and above. You see, when you first start Dark Souls, they start you off in this asylum, and they give you just the very bare minimum, and they allow you to pick your class, and then you kind of have to run through the first boss before you could do a plunging attack. And then it teaches you that plunging attacks can do a lot of damage if you're able to initiate them on bosses. And it's something innately that they teach you that you're not going to think that you're going to be doing a lot, but there are a lot of opportunities within Dark Souls that you can do that. And even in other iterations of the games later on, like Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and even now in Elden Ring, there are plenty of times where you could do plunging attacks or even jump attacks into poise controlling an enemy and knocking them down. From there, once you defeat the first boss of the game, you can immediately head off and do what you need to do in Dark Souls. Even though the game I would consider to be one of the most linear of the Dark Souls, but it has such an interconnective path, you can pretty much go anywhere you want and still be able to accomplish what you need to do. Now, there's obviously a clear path forward to being able to clear a lot of the stuff, because you have to ring the top bell and the bottom bell before you can go through and complete a good portion of the game. And with the seals being there, you have to, of course, break those seals before you could go for the other bosses, which allows you to complete the endgame boss. But you have this freedom, but also partial illusion of choice. And that's what Elden Ring doesn't have. You see, Elden Ring has the open world concept. So you could stay in Limgrave and farm to level 100 if you realistically wanted. You could go immediately to Caelid, obviously, but that would be considered a bad choice since the enemies are definitely of a higher health pool, which means that it kind of pushes you away from that. And the game gives you this idea that you have to go through certain points before you can do what you would in a former Dark Souls game. But it also teaches you that there's no reason to fight anything that you don't want to. There are paths around Stormvale Castle, so you don't even have to fight Margit the moment you see him. You can go all the way through the Lakes of Lernia and never have to fight Renala off the get-go. You can go straight to Volcano Manor if you really wanted to. It's just that there's really no reason to. And unlike in Dark Souls and the former iterations, you are kind of stuck going somewhere, and if you are having to go that path, you're just kind of bashing your head against the wall until you can actually complete it. In Elden Ring, if you're struggling with something, you can easily go in whatever direction you want and do what you need to do, find new weapons, and experiment. But in the older Souls games, you are forced to be stuck with what you got. Starting off with Dark Souls 2 now, you have this thing called soul memory. And now, I know a lot of people really hated this mechanic, but I think that's what made it a little bit easier for people going through subsequent runs, or even on their first run if they're really, really struggling, along with the 10 death mechanic. So the 10 death mechanic was designed to help people literally progress through the game regardless of how good or bad they were at the game. If you killed an enemy, rested at a bonfire, and you did that 10 times, that enemy permanently dies. So if you are struggling to make it through a certain section because you don't have enough Estus, you don't have enough life gems, or anything like that, you could constantly rest at a bonfire, kill that enemy, and progress forward without ever dying if you really, really needed to. It also introduced the first time, and I believe the last time, that we've ever had to level up something to get iframes. So that's kind of what added a lot of artificial difficulty to the game for a lot of people, was because they had to invest into a stat that literally just gave them their iframes on their rolls. Other than that, Dark Souls 2, I believe, is one of the most balanced of the FromSoft games, where if you wanted to go in, you could have a really easy time without having to learn or know anything about any of the bosses, how the weapons work, or anything like that, while also having similar stuff to Elden Ring, where you have weapon arts and weapon styles, but the difference is on Elden Ring, you have weapon styles that you can multi-class into different things. We have spinny weapon grave scythes that can easily bleed an enemy to death. You can use the new Radon move, where you can just spin through the air with a blood greatsword and absolutely drill dozer through enemies. Or, you could also just go full on Unga Bunga, get a Blood Fiend arm, and turn it into blood, where you have the highest bleed damage weapon ever made in a FromSoft game, where 2 hits and you bleed the enemy. Of course, that's not limited to some of the other stuff that has also come out that is incredibly crazy, with even spells. We had Comet Azure for the longest time being the go-to mage build. And now we have ones such as the Perfumer's Bottle with the Rolling Spark that just allows you to absolutely decimate things with 20k damage, if not more than that. And Impenetrable Thorns also being very similar to the Blood Fiend Armed, where you can just basically 2-hit the enemy with 20,000 damage per hit and then also bleed them. The thing is, some of these require a setup, but a lot of these are really simple items that you can get within the first 10 to 30 minutes of your time in Elden Ring. The problem is knowing where to get them, and a lot of people like to go in blind into stuff, but we'll talk more about that later. Dark Souls 3 is one of the most beloved of the FromSoft games. Between all the different bosses and how they function, to just even fan favorites that I believed are overhyped like Gale, you have such unique concepts to these boss fights, and it allows you to really flourish with your builds just due to how long the game actually is compared to some of the other Dark Souls games, where you might cap off at like 125, 135 on your first runs, where Dark Souls 3, you could easily get into the 200s on your first playthrough. And that's very similar to Elden Ring, where if you are really struggling or you're really having some issues, there are definitely some very, very easy souls or rune farming where you can peak off your levels, or you could just continuously like crash out until you get to the point where you need to be, where you could just do whatever you want and be able to conquer everything before you. The thing that made Dark Souls 3 the hardest, though, was a lot of the mechanics required you to use outside sources to get rid of status effects that normally you wouldn't even think about. Like the maggots becoming a huge issue when you first get to the church or the cathedral, and you have to put on a torch to get rid of them, otherwise you're going to suffer bleed loss and it's going to be stuck with you for a while, and it's just going to eat through your Estus. There's also the issue for some people with enemy density, where we definitely saw that enemy density was some of the worst that FromSoft has ever done, in my opinion. I know Dark Souls 1 definitely had some of its issues with that as well, but depending on your weapon type in Dark Souls 1, you definitely had an easier time with the mob density, because one sweep would clear out an entire wave. I'm looking at you, Chaos Wielder, Zweihander, however you want to pronounce it. But here, the dogs are the second most terrible iteration up until Elden Ring, where these dogs would just stagger you and then easily just rip through you, especially if you had more than 2 on you at a time. Dark Souls 3 was also probably one of the ones with the least amount of linear pathing. You see, in Dark Souls 3, you can pretty much go anywhere you want up until you get to Ithril. And that's just because you need to defeat the Deacons of the Deep for the doll. But you could pretty much go any direction you wanted to start off your initial start. You can even skip the Curse-Rotted Grape Tree, you know, that one, and head straight through, and your first boss fight could be the Abyss guys if you really wanted, the Hunters of the Abyss. And that added a lot of weapon variety and just things you could pick up immediately that you don't have in older FromSoft games, but you definitely do have in Elden Ring. You're not stuck with the certain weapons that you have on the linear paths like Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, and it allows you to kind of go and get what you need to get, especially when it comes to like bows, swords, all that kind of stuff, as well as incantations and spells that are going to be extremely useful to you. You also had a lot more merchants than you did in Dark Souls 1 and 2, just straight away within the first couple of hours of Dark Souls 3, that allow you to get whatever you need immediately from your location that is the main hub. But Dark Souls 2 definitely had the best hub, music-wise, character layouts, etc. And it's not that egregious in Dark Souls 3, but it definitely is a little more annoying having to go between the different levels and running around to all the different characters sprawled out through the area, whereas Majula was definitely a lot more centered. In Elden Ring, we kind of don't have that luxury, but we do have something that no other game has done, which is allow us to see where the NPCs are on the map. And that's another thing that we didn't really have from a lot of the other FromSoft games starting early on, was general locations that we could just constantly revisit with ease, like we do in Elden Ring, where we have a map, we have fast travel, we have the ability to use a horse to quickly maneuver. In Dark Souls 3, you had to hope that a bonfire was close enough to what you wanted. You had to remember where it was at. You didn't remember where any of the NPCs were, then that's kind of on you. Or if you didn't even find any of them, that's really, really on you. Elden Ring kind of hands you everything that you need when it comes to finding pretty much anything. Sure, a lot of the other items might be up on cliffs or stuff and you don't know how to get there, but eventually all of it leads you to where you need to go, and majority of the items really aren't that far out of their ways so that you don't get them. I'd argue the only one that I ever saw that was really out of its way was one that I was going to get for the legendary armaments, and it was by a bunch of ants. And those ants, I didn't even notice the legendary armament there when I was trying to get it. But that's definitely on me. That's like an issue of my own and not an issue of the game design. And that brings me up to what the real issue is. And that's the player. It's you. And that's why a lot of people say skill issue. And it's something that I don't necessarily like, even as a FromSoft veteran, because I've always been about jolly cooperation. I've always been about helping another person complete something that is difficult, that is a hard and arduous task. And that's what a lot of the FromSoft games are. They are long, they're arduous, they're difficult. But there are so many things in the games that allow you to progress with such ease that you just don't even think about them, or you just simply don't incorporate them, because some of these people have such an extremist look to the game that they feel like if you don't play this way, then you're not playing correctly, which is a huge issue when you think about it, because you are letting somebody dictate how you paid for your game for you to play. And I believe once we get over that assumption and get over that look of letting other people dictate how we play, that we will flourish better and understand how to complete content easier. So let's start off with one of the issues. So the first issue is player skill. And there's 3 types of player skill. There's going to be the newcomer, and that might be a lot of you who came into Elden Ring and the DLC and you're having these issues. When you're new to the FromSoft games, or you're new to any of the Dark Souls games or any Souls-like, learning the basic mechanics, no matter how innate and dumb they might sound, is going to progress you significantly harder than anything that you could do when it comes to picking an overpowered weapon, picking a weapon type, picking anything like that. Learning iframes, learning a enemy's moveset, learning an enemy's weakness is going to be significantly better than having to pick like an Uchi Katana with bleed, or doing a spinning Grey Scythe jump build, or even using the really what a lot of Souls-like players are probably going to consider easy mode now, like the Impenetrable Thorns build or the Perfumer build. Understanding that you have to dodge here when the swing is here, or you have to parry when this is here, is going to help you a lot more than just trying to brute force through stuff. Understanding that fleshy enemies are weak to slash and bleed, compared to just trying to bonk it to death with a hammer, is going to be better than trying to just brute force it. Learning that armored enemies, depending on if they're considered light or heavy armor, is going to be a significant difference, and learning that you're better off with a poking or thrusting weapon on light armor and a blunt weapon on heavy armor. And this has been sort of a thing that has been through every RPG, because even though this game is a Souls-like, it is an RPG. And a lot of the mechanics from every RPG carries over to a lot of other RPGs. And a lot of ones that you're going to see here are definitely from games like Dungeons and Dragons, where those enemies, those enemy different types and weaknesses are going to carry over between all of them. Like fleshy bits, again, are going to be very, very susceptible to fire. Some are going to be susceptible to frost, but realistically, if you see an enemy using frost, use fire. If you see a dragon, they're using fire, use thunder on it. It's very much just kind of like a Pokemon, what beats what, and it's using that against it. And it's not cheating, it's not hacking, it's not modding, it's just using game knowledge. Some people are going to, say that summons are cheating. Some people are going to say jolly cooperation is cheating and you're just cheating yourself out of the experience. But there's no reason to make you hate yourself and make you hate the game simply because people are telling you that you're playing wrong. And that brings me to the second type of Dark Souls players. And these are the people that are just kind of the casual but decent enjoyers of the game. I wouldn't consider them the veterans, but some of the veterans might fall into here because they still understand some of the basic mechanics, but they don't fully utilize them. Or they might just play to have fun with the Dark Souls games, and regardless of how many times they die, they're just going to keep going at it until they eventually beat it, and then just going to have a smile on their face. There's nothing really for them to learn, and there's nothing really for them to gain from learning new mechanics and stuff, because they're just going to keep going at it regardless of the situation and just have fun. And that's one of the most commemorable things that you could go about it. Then you have the third type. These are the elitists and toxics. These are the people that constantly point out what 0.1% of the people in Dark Souls and Elden Ring are doing, and saying that because they can do it, you can do the same exact thing, which is not entirely correct. And it is one of the problems that I've had with the community ever since Elden Ring has come out, that a lot of these people are like this. And it's gotten worse as time's progressed with Elden Ring, of people being like, well, you see, Zero Lenny completed the entire DLC with just a torch and upgrading no Scadutree fragments, so you should be able to do that. Well, no, you understand this person has played Elden Ring so much, he's done broken sword runs, he's done all those types of things where he doesn't need to use any of that stuff. He's played so much, and he's been such an enjoyer of the game that he can do that kind of stuff with no issues. Yeah, he's going to get frustrated. Yeah, he's going to get tilted off just like any of the newbies or anybody else who's just kind of a casual enjoyer that just can't progress through something and is getting frustrated. But at the core is he understands everything to the point where he can do that. The problem is not everybody's going to understand that, even if they have the materials to understand that, such as video guides, YouTube tutorials. You can even go as far to say Fextra Life if you really wanted to, but, you know, it's Fextra Life. Let's be real. Or you're going to have people like, you know, Iron Pineapple, who just kind of steamroll everything, or even Esoteric, the crazy bastard that he was, that went through all the Dark Souls games back to back, I believe, without ever getting hit. You know, that's an anomaly. That's not the normal. And yet the elitists and the toxics treat this like this is something that is possible. And it kind of disencourages a lot of people to the point where it just kind of breaks people into these different categories, when really it should just be about building each other up and celebrating the accomplishments of everybody. But obviously some people deserve more praise than others when it comes to completing these things. But you don't need to put down people's accomplishments simply because they didn't do it your way or your style. The last thing I'm going to talk about is what makes the game so difficult and what brings out this question every time it happens, which is the DLC or is any FromSoft game too hard that we need difficulty sliders? And the real answer to that is that it's the first week of release. Okay? You got to understand that myself and less than 100 other people were a part of the press release. We, you know, went through the game, we played everything, we got all the stuff, you know, we had a review guide, all that craziness, right? But some of us in that struggled a lot more than others, and especially with certain bosses. You know, I'm not gonna lie, I crushed most of the bosses within 2 to 3 attempts, except for Radon, and I went through it 185 times before I eventually got through it. But my issue was that I wasn't utilizing the open world and finding everything that I need to actually complete and beat a character. And that's what Elden Ring does best, is that during your first week, nobody knows anything. You're going to kind of go through, you'll be able to find the stuff you need. People share it online, and people will talk about it, and then it'll kind of give you an idea of what you need to go get and what you need to do. Because the first week of any FromSoft game is the most difficult week. After that, there's so much public information out there, if you wish to go look it up, that you'll be able to cruise through right after. And that's just the same thing with this DLC. The first couple of days were so ridiculously difficult that people were stuck on, Renala, or Rolana, whatever the hell her name was. The Pontiff 2.0 mixed with Dancer from Dark Souls 3. They were stuck for so long. And then people put out some real quick guides, and those 235 deaths that some people had cleared it crystal clear next day, because Perfumer build came out, Impenetrable Thorns build came out, 185% damage buffs came out, and people were showing how to do this stuff to be able to easily clear the DLC. And then we've resorted back to what I would consider Dark Souls 2 status of put on heavy poise armor, get something to just poke shit, and there you go. You can clear whatever the hell you want now. You are the wall. You are now let me tank him. People always attribute their downfalls to just not going out and being informed. And people will always contribute it to not using every little thing that they have for them given to them, and not understanding why they are failing. Even now, as this DLC starts to enter its second week, there are probably still going to be a lot of people that are struggling with the DLC. And that's perfectly okay. But there's no reason to complain about the difficulty when you can literally go look up everything. And I understand maybe you don't want to be spoiled or whatever, but at a certain point, when you're just complaining that the DLC is too hard without utilizing literally everything ever given to you, especially in 2024, is just kind of disappointing. There's no reason not to just use everything given. Unless you are actually trying to do a certain challenge, a certain playthrough or anything, there's no reason to just try and brute force your way through stuff, and instead of just using the game mechanics, using different builds, and trying different stuff just to be able to get through the content. In short, is the DLC too difficult? Yeah. If you don't understand how to play the game, it could be incredibly difficult. Not using what the game has given you, using any of the mechanics, using any boss's weaknesses, doing anything like that, not using summons. Yeah, it's difficult. Rightfully so. But is it actually? No. It's not. Everything that you need to beat every boss, to defeat every enemy, is given to you. You just have to know how to use it. Whether it's you learn through trial and error, or you just look it up. There's nothing wrong with how you discover and how you complete anything that you do. Because at the end of the day, I beat Primerdon. You could beat Primerdon. Does it matter how we beat Primerdon? No. The accomplishment is just saying that I beat it. As long as you didn't hack like a fucking scumbag, then you're cool. Nobody's going to care. The only people that are going to care are the people whose opinions don't matter, because they think they're better than everybody else anyway. So why let them bring you down? Well, that's the end of it. And honestly, it just feels kind of nice to say. But I hope you guys take care, stay awesome. If you'd like to see more of my content, click through. If you'd like to see more Elden Ring stuff, or whenever I get enough time to actually do a Dark Souls 1 through Elden Ring and the DLCs and all that playthrough in one sitting, make sure to just keep an eye out. I'll post it to YouTube, and let my Twitch link be out there for when that happens. But until then, you guys take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye, guys.